Welcome, everyone, to our breakout session from the ground up. What's next for the American Plant Forward Kitchen? Thank you to our generous sponsor, Plate Magazine, for this session. And it's my pleasure to bring up Chandra Ram as our moderator for this session.
Hi, thank you so much, Patty, for having me here. This has been a fantastic conference so far, and I'm really excited to get into this next conversation about what's next for the American Plant Forward Kitchen. Just to think about, there's never been a larger, more diverse, and more energized community of American chefs committing to advancing plant-based and plant-forward cooking in their restaurants and in their books and in their communications with their customers. So today we've asked three very talented chefs who are also happen to be pioneers of plant-forward cooking to show the rest of us what's possible as they craft their vision for the future of American dining. We'll talk about what flavors they're using, what menu directions are captivating them as we look at how to move plant-forward cooking forward in American restaurants. We'll also talk a bit about how their customers and the American dining public more broadly are supportive of this movement. So I'd love to bring our chefs up to the virtual stage. First, we have joining us Kiki Luya. Kiki is a Detroit-born chef, entrepreneur, food activist, community partner, and storyteller who works to build a healthier, more equitable food system. She founded Folk and the Farmer's Hand, two award-winning food concepts with the purpose of supporting the fair treatment of food and farm workers alike. Also joining us is Amanda Cohen, who I call one of the godmothers of the plant-based restaurant movement. She is the James Beard nominated chef owner of the award-winning Dirt Candy, the first vegetable-focused restaurant located in New York City's Lower East Side. She's also one of the Iron Chefs on Iron Chef Canada and just an inspiration to so many of us. And as well, last but certainly not least, we have Chidi Kumar, who is the chef owner of Garland in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she melds influences from her family's cooking, her time growing up in Chandigarh, India, as well as in New York City, along with local agriculture in her menu, which is seasonally evolving foods with influences from all over. So thank you all so much for taking some time today to talk with me about this topic, and let's kind of get into it. I want to ask you, and I know this is a bit broad, but when you're looking at your menus, what is the first thing you think of? When you're looking at, say, hey, whether it's adding a new menu item, one or two or three at a time, or creating an entire seasonal menu, just kind of brainstorming about that. What are the first things that you really think of? And Chidi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I always just look at what the farmers are growing around here, and I really feel like it's important to taste each ingredient every year because, a tomato from year to year is different. Butternut squash can be different from year to year. The climate really influences how things are grown, the rainfall, all of that. So I usually just start with the actual vegetables and fruit that we have that are available to us, and then try to see what they need to be their best.
Okay. Amanda, how about you?
Well, usually it's what positions in the menu need to be filled, and then I go from there. So it's sort of almost backwards from what Chidi said, although I have something to add on to that. So yeah, we always have a pasta dish, and we always sort of try to have a more main dish that feels like almost like the steak or the meat dish at the end. It's all a tasting menu. And then we have our amuse-bouches, and we have like our dish that we would consider more our salad. And so then we find the vegetable and season at that moment that we want to slot into that position. But just to add on to what Chidi was saying, it's not just that every season the vegetable tastes different. It's like every day it tastes different. And so this is a constant where they're like, well, I did the same thing. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's Tuesday. And that was Wednesday of last week. Like, you got to keep tasting constantly because they really, really do just change so fast throughout the season when they're grown and from the different purveyors.
I just ate not nearly like ripe enough watermelon, or just like a too early in the season watermelon. So I am experiencing that very personally today.
There's a place for the unripe watermelon. It's just not exactly what you think of as watermelon. So you could probably do something with it, but yeah, not
For sure. And I will. And I was just sort of like, I went into it wanting that like late summer, just sweetness and juice and everything. And I was like, what are you doing? It's mid-June. You live in Chicago. Stop it. Stop doing that. So, Kiki, how about you? What do you think about?
I'd say it's probably somewhere in the middle. I think similar to Amanda, there's kind of a structure to our menu when I was with Folk and also the Farmer's Hand. So we had slots that we needed to fill, and we changed it with the seasons, and for us, the seasons were 6, right? So our relationships, I think, with the farmers constantly bring different things in, and we would constantly be tasting and trying to incorporate as many of those ingredients as we could. But typically it started out with just a general menu structure. And yeah, if we were inspired by a certain ingredient, or we felt really strongly that we wanted to feature something on the menu that was tasting really great and was like at the height of its season, we would. So it's a little bit of both.
Okay. And I kind of want to piggyback on that a little bit. And I really genuinely am not trying to make a food pun. I just haven't figured out a different way to ask this, but it's kind of it is a chicken or an egg question of your starting point when you are thinking about any sort of entree or main dish. One thing that I see and kind of wish I didn't see, I guess, is so many people seeming to start of, this is a vegetable version of a meat dish. This is like a vegetable version of pulled pork, or this is a vegetable version of a burger. And I would rather just be like, hey, this is a vegetable, period. So, but I also understand that, people love burgers and chefs need to you've got to find a balance there. So I'm very curious for you all, how you approach that thinking.
I personally have a bit, and this is again my own personal issue, but I think that when there is something that we're trying to fit into, it's like a square peg in a round hole. So it's like, this is a chicken nugget, but it's just made with soy or tempeh or something along those lines, right? It's often, I think, that vegetables are so beautiful on their own. And so why do we have to then make it into something that is more recognizable? And at the same time, I understand why we have to make things more recognizable, right? And like from I think a restaurant perspective, you want things to sell. So maybe calling things what people might associate them with is something that's familiar. Sometimes that helps things sell. But at the same time, I think for me and myself personally, whenever I do, see a menu and I see that it's trying to be something that maybe it's a hamburger, right? But it's calling it a veggie burger with whatever else it is. With vegan cheese, I personally feel like this is just a really great veggie patty, and just say what's in it. And I would be to have it as I would if you called it what you think I might recognize it as.
I'm a little of the opposite from Kiki, because I actually, having done this for many years and just trying to get people to eat their vegetables, which is really impossible, I find them more recognizable, sort of the names. And we do a lot of puns here, right? So we have like a beet steak frite for our last course, and it's just a piece of beet and with like some beet chickpea fries on the side, but it sort of gives people the idea of what they're about to eat, and then it's sort of that like intro to it. Like we have our broccoli hot dogs, and they are just a piece of broccoli and they're smoked and grilled and then they're put in a bun. But then people sort of come to it with this idea of what they're going to taste, and I think it makes them a little bit more excited, because there really are. I think I'm an amazing chef, but I'm not really creating any like new flavors or doing anything like that. I'm just using what's in all of our arsenal, and those are the flavors that my customers know. And so I want them to feel that familiarity while I'm giving them something else that's really weird, because I'm making them eat a piece of broccoli in a bun. So that's already strange enough. It's easier to, so instead of saying, this is a broccoli in a bun, which it totally is, it kind of makes it sound more fun, and they get into the idea of it when it's like broccoli hot dog.
I mean, I love your broccoli hot dog because, and then I think it spawned like a carrot hot dog and another, you've obviously inspired a lot of people, but I think I always love the fact that you were like, obviously this is a joke, guys, but please eat this piece of broccoli.
That's right. I mean, it's definitely not, it's not really a hot dog. It's never going to be a hot dog. It's always going to be a piece of broccoli in a bun. But that sounds a little sexier, a broccoli hot dog than broccoli between two pieces of bread.
I mean, the other sounds like a haiku or something. But. Chidi, how about you? Any?
Well, I think I fall somewhere in the middle there. I think it's depending. I don't like the idea of perpetuating the notion that everything has to be sort of a meat dish. And so using just vegetables and exploring the flavors of a vegetable and presenting it maybe in the format of a hot dog or a hamburger is kind of different than using a soy patty that is a product that's industrially produced. And it sort of perpetuates this notion that to have a complete meal, you have to have meat. Well, okay, if you're not going to have meat, then you have to have something that's a substitute for meat. When there is a giant world out there that has been eating vegetables as a mainstay of their diet for thousands and thousands of years. And it's only in the last 80 or 100 years that Americans have perpetuated this notion that, we all need protein at every meal, or animal protein at every meal. So, I mean, I love the idea of being playful and creative and kind of using that allure of creativity to get people to eat their vegetables. But I stop short of using meat substitutes, I guess. I know nobody else here is like doing that, but I'm always conscious of it. Like, does it have to be presented in a way that a steak would, or but then we also have to stay in business, and I'm always challenging myself with that notion. So,
Yeah, like it's
never easy.
We had a few years ago with Plate, we did a vegan issue, and we had on the cover it was a tomato tartare that had what looked like an egg yolk, but it was like a scoop of emulsified carrot juice. But it was one of the things that I felt like kind of leaned more towards like, hey, we just thought this would be like kind of striking and funny. It was gorgeous. It was really beautiful. But it does seem like you have to, it seems like you all are doing a little bit of a dance here back and forth between does it mean that you're operating under the idea that your customers would prefer meat, or that they eat meat more often?
Well, I bet that tartare tasted like tomatoes and carrots, which is different than something that's trying to taste like meat, and it's not. And that might be a nuanced conversation, but that's playful versus, I don't know, substitution. Not sure if I have the right word here.
No. I
think it ultimately always comes down to how things taste, right?
Yeah. And that's something else that, again, I might be going way off here, but I was thinking about this conversation and how so much of it comes down to that whole idea. And Amanda, you just said oh, I'm trying to get people to eat their vegetables. And it reminds me of being a little kid and my mom being like, you need to eat your vegetables, except they were these, canned or frozen green beans that were not super appetizing, nowhere near in the same plane as what the three of you are doing. And it got me thinking that 15 years ago, say, I think, when bacon became this ingredient that was all over the place, and people were putting bacon, wrapping everything in bacon and making all of these, it was oh, we're putting bacon, crumbled up on top of this, and we're making bacon cocktails and rimming them with crushed bacon, and we've got bacon in our desserts and all of that. And I was like, people aren't. And actually at this conference with some of the people from the doctors from Harvard School of Public Health, like they were just so horrified to find out that that's what the food world was doing. And I was trying to say, like, they're not doing it because it's unhealthy. They're doing it because of the flavor. And I wish there was more of that way of thinking with vegetables, that like like a beautiful carrot is just like one of my absolute favorite things to eat. Or I was talking earlier about the fact that like it's been a really warm summer in the Midwest. And so we're very hopeful that we're going to have sweet corn in sooner rather than later. But that's just, like we're now in this getting towards this period where it's like every week there's going to be something new. Like we're going to get peaches soon. And I wonder if like how much you're able to have that conversation with your customers in your restaurants about like, no, this isn't something that you have to do. It's something that you want to do by eating more vegetables.
Well, I hope they want to. They're at my restaurant.
I mean, if they're at your restaurant,
Amanda,
you're like, sorry, friends, but you have no options.
That's right. You're stuck eating the vegetables. You have no choice. I think, it's like a ping pong conversation. You want to do really fun things with the vegetables, and you also want people to know they're eating vegetables. I don't want people to leave and be like, oh, I had no idea what I ate. It's very clear when you leave here that they've eaten, but I want them to sort of be like, that's the best carrot dish I've ever eaten. Not necessarily the best carrot, because I probably don't buy the best carrots in the world. We just buy them, from wherever. Sometimes the deli. It doesn't matter. Any carrot will do here. But I want them to have eaten a carrot dish and sort of be like, that is the best carrot dish I've ever had. And then hopefully it sort of inspires them to either go home and make it, or come back and eat it here again. But to keep sort of exploring the world of vegetables and not be put off by it. When I opened Dirt Candy like 13 years ago, I swear the bulk of my customers would come in and be like, oh, vegetables? I've never eaten like a whole vegetarian meal. I don't even know if they've eaten a vegetarian dish. What are you talking about? I can't do this. And I'd be like, I bet you've eaten a piece of cheese pizza. And they'd be like, yeah, but that doesn't count. I'm like, what about cereal? But this notion of eating sort of all these like, vegetables at once, or like having a vegetarian meal. And now I never hear that anymore. Like, it's like the world has, certainly the New York world has sort of changed its diet. And the concept of eating vegetarian food and vegetables as actually the main course to me has really changed. But the way I think we've all gotten them to do that is not just been like, here, there's carrots on a plate, and they can be delicious, but you have to up the game a little, because you're also charging them a lot, right? And so we sort of we get these sort of two different kinds of reviews, which is, we get a lot of really good ones, but then our negative ones are either that's, you're trying too hard with the carrot, or it's not creative enough with the carrot, which is kind of, makes you feel crazy.
Right.
What can I do to make you people happy? But the sort of like general viewpoint is, oh, you're doing something really fun with it. And it's something that I've never thought of doing before. And that's what I want people to walk away with, which is, wow, I never knew you could do that with a carrot. You almost think I do really weird things with carrots. Not that weird. Poor kid.
Yeah, I think touching on what Amanda said about an earlier menu structures, you kind of dictate what kind of meal people have in your restaurant by how you structure your menu. And if you weight it, of course, Amanda's restaurants is all vegetarian, but ours does have meat and fish. But the majority of our menu is vegetables or vegetarian forward. And it kind of, and we encourage people to share things and try a bunch of stuff and not just go, this is my appetizer, this is my entree, and that's all, I'm not sharing anything, that's sort of not the kind of restaurant we are. So I think you kind of send that message, and the longer you stick around, the more, you're able to express that ethos and whatever is important to you, and hopefully people keep coming back and keep your doors open. But in the beginning, we had to explain a lot of things, like why we don't have butter chicken on our menu, but that's a different conversation.
Out of curiosity, we talked about this before. How old were you when you had butter chicken for the first time?
Yeah, probably like 19 or 20. Like at once I left my parents' house and I went to an Indian restaurant that I was like, never actually had butter chicken. Let me try it. And yep, it's buttery.
I was dating some guy and he was like, what do you mean? I was like, no, never had it.
Yeah.
But
I think the only thing I'd love to add to that, because Amanda, you kind of touched upon it, but I think it's the customer perception sometimes when you have people who are typically looking to have a meat forward dish or meat dish, and then there's the price point that kind of comes into play. So it's almost as though people sometimes have the idea where if something is priced a certain way and it doesn't have meat on it, then is it really worth that value? And I think that for us, especially, at Folk and also the Farmer's Hand, we are a pretty mid-range priced restaurant. We don't have a tasting menu. We try to be a little bit more accessible with things, but we still come up against that conversation where, and also I think similar to you, Chidi, we're not an entirely vegetarian restaurant, right? We have some meat options as well. But so, getting people to kind of understand, I think the true value of food is something that we do consistently. And that includes not just the meat aspect of dishes, but also vegetables as well.
Dishes have a lot of labor, so way more labor. Like right now, you should see my kitchen. There's like 30 people in there. And so, but it's really hard to explain that value to people when they don't see that one luxurious ingredient. And it doesn't have to even be on every plate. It just has to be one place in the menu. We don't have caviar. We don't have expensive beef. We don't have lobster and truffles. We again just have carrots.
The unknown, like, little secret, it's not that hard to cook a beautiful piece of beef when it comes in and it's lovely and all you have to do is sear it. There's no labor involved in that. But vegetables require a lot of hands, 100%.
Amanda mentioned that things were, customers in New York at least were a little bit more open to vegetarian or at least like vegetable forward menus. Chidi, Kiki, are you seeing the same? And Amanda, was I kind of referencing that correctly? Like you're seeing more demand for it, more interest in it?
Oh my gosh, way more interest than there's ever been before.
Well, we're here in the South and it's not the deep South, but still, I think for sure there's a segment of the population that is way more receptive to creative vegetarian cooking or just creative non-Eurocentric cooking. But I think we're probably, lagging behind, and as we do in being open to it. I feel like the restaurants that are vegetable forward or vegetarian forward that are really successful have a lot of like vegan fried meat substitute options. That's what people are just like craving, and maybe they're cooking a lot at home, and I hope that's the case, and they're not necessarily able to fry at home, and that's what they gravitate towards. But it's a little bit of guilty pleasure stuff that gets traction, as opposed to something that might be really nuanced, a lot of components, and is super creative, and it's pretty. We're having an easier time selling that to somebody who's maybe looking for meat. I get a lot of folks who are like, I don't like carrots and I don't like beets, but this was amazing, and like I hate raw tomatoes, but this was awesome. Like the creativity and the breadth of ideas that you can put forward in a simple way, not to crush or overpower the ingredients. I think that goes a long way to getting people to be open to new things.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Similar in the Midwest. I'm in Detroit, so the Midwest loves our meat. We really, truly do. I think Folk is an interesting one simply because we didn't really advertise ourselves as a vegetarian restaurant because we aren't truly vegetarian, more vegetable forward. So I think that the people who we typically sell to are looking for approach to their food anyway, and kind of have the understanding that, one way to go about that is through vegetables. So I think that, and also Detroit, I think in terms of maybe the rest of the Midwest, or at least with Michigan, is maybe a little bit farther along with this kind of thinking. So we just typically attract people who are looking for more vegetables in their diet. But I don't know that that's necessarily indicative of what's going on in the rest of the Midwest. I think we, again, still really like our meat.
Yeah. And I think it kind of leads into the question of accessibility. Kiki, I was looking at your work and, what you do when you're consulting with people, and you referenced the sort of triple bottom line of societal, environmental, and financial good. And a plant-based menu fits that well, but it begs the question of, like, is it accessible for more people? How are you approaching that in your work?
Great question. Because I think that the other part of that, the people approach, right, is community. And I think that in Detroit, the triple bottom line approach, or quadruple, bottom line approach is very much kind of championed, I think, throughout the city, simply because of our really storied history. We're a very poor city. The majority of residents here in Detroit live below the poverty line. We are also a majority African American city, with 80% of our residents being African American. And so there are a lot of, I think, nuances within our food scene where I think just in our city in general, where people are feeling very pushed out and priced out, really is what it comes down to. And they have been in the city for generations. And I normally approach this in my consulting work because food is very much a conduit for other issues that are going on kind of at a global sense, but also obviously as a regional sense. So when I think about food and accessibility, and if you're going to start a restaurant in the middle of the city, I think you really have to think about the community that you exist within. Far too often, unfortunately, we see that Detroit has very inexpensive real estate right now, and so you can really do anything, right? It's been called a blank slate in a lot of circles, and I just don't think that that's the case. I could kind of go on a tangent about this, but food in Detroit is very important to how we make people feel included in conversations, right? And I think that I am working with a client, a potential restaurant, or even a community development corporation, right? If they're trying to do sustainable development, you have to think about the people that it affects. And that includes everything from price point to location, right? To the food that's on your menu, accessibility, who you're working with, your purveyors, all of that. It's one ecosystem. And I think that we have to kind of look at it like that too, with everything that we do.
No, that's such important work you're doing. And then, but on the flip side, and one of the chefs at the conference here put into the chat, this question of how do you change the perception that a customer might have that a vegetarian dish is less expensive to produce, or should be priced less because the raw product is less expensive. Chidi, you were talking about how much more labor it takes, and Amanda, you said you've got like 30 people in your kitchen there. How much, there's so much more labor involved with producing a vegetarian or vegetable forward dish. But how do you convince people to pay a lot of money for it, for the other end of the spectrum, when you want them to respect the work that goes into it?
I mean, honestly, sometimes vegetables aren't much cheaper than meat. I mean, asparagus was $6 a pound here this year, and I can get brisket for less than that, and it's
right,
sustainably grown, and it's local, and I know who's raising the cows. I think that's maybe a bigger conversation about how Americans value food. And, Americans expect food to be cheap because we've always just thought that, well, that person doesn't need to get paid. Well, that person doesn't need to get paid. And all along the line, there's like these little spots of undervaluing. And I don't know what it's going to take besides restaurants leading like we always do, independent restaurants, setting the prices to make it so we can pay our folks a wage that is reasonable and sustainable for them and their life, and for them to make food a career, and food a career, not just a job that'll tide them over until they decide to leave and do something else. I don't really have the answers because I don't know how to make that also accessible to people who don't have the money to spend in a restaurant that is charging what the food should cost to prepare it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We could go. I think we could talk about this for years, and we probably need to. And we need to make it a public conversation so people understand what we're up against or what we're dealing with. Maybe not against, but what we're dealing with.
I think I'm going to add on that one of the things that happened because of the pandemic is we actually started talking about restaurant workers a lot, right? We basically spent a year calling restaurant workers essential workers and delivery drivers. And we talked about restaurants a lot this past year. Like there was a lot of articles about us, and a lot of restaurateurs wrote articles, and, they talked about their business. And so the pandemic was bad, but one silver lining, I think we started to break down that fourth wall a little, which you don't really want to do because you still want restaurants to be magical, a fantasy place. But at the same time, we've made them into such fantasies that we're so far away in the customer's perception of reality that wall has to get broken down. And that's, I think this past year and everything that's been written and all the interviews and everything that people have done and gotten out of their comfort zone and really talked about what it means to run a restaurant has been actually to the good of restaurants, and customers are sort of starting to get it. Certainly, I've talked a lot about how expensive it is to run a restaurant. And I don't think over the past 10 years, anybody's really paid that much attention to me. And to, add on to what Chidi says, it's not that vegetables or meat are that expensive. It doesn't matter how much they cost because everything else is more expensive. Like your food costs, and this is really hard. This is like, I do not know how we'll quite change this perception, but your food costs are, they're not the biggest cost you have. That's not what your customers are paying for. They're renting your table, and I need you to pay me $200 to rent that table for the 2 hours you're going to be here. And so everything goes back from there. And once we can sort of start to get customers to understand that, I think at Dirt Candy, one of the ways we've done this is we put it straight on the menu that your prices are expensive because we pay a fair wage to our customers. And so from the get-go, or we pay a fair wage to our staff. And so from the get-go, they know that this is going to be expensive, but why? Like, it's expensive now. Like you just have to accept that because I'm paying everybody in my back of house and my front of house a really fair living wage. And, we broke down that fourth wall with that.
Yeah.
It's wild to me because I feel like you guys have all been pulled into this position of being, like having to hit both sides of this, as we said, like try and make food more accessible to people who can't afford it, but then also advocate to charge everybody else the money that they should pay for these ingredients and for that labor and for, the rent and the air conditioning and the water and the candles and the glassware and all the things.
They have to pay the toilet paper. It's not free.
The gloves.
And the gloves and the masks, the hand sanitizer. I actually saw someone was sharing something on Twitter about a customer getting banned from a restaurant because they were stealing toilet paper. And I'm just like, so now you know how expensive it is, right? But it feels like you all have, you have been pulled into this position of being kind of political advocates as well as chefs. How does that feel? Is it just part of the job now?
I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I've always thought that food, right? Like I mentioned earlier, that I think it touches every aspect of society, and I think that we have a lot more power to create change than I think a lot of us give ourselves credit for. And so I think that obviously we're not going to change the world. We're not going to change, you know, everything about the food system, but we can make incremental steps towards making something meaningful, and making a little bit of a dent, and just changing people's perceptions about things kind of one person at a time. So that's kind of how I like to approach it, is I use my food to share things that I think are important to me, and I think that we should, take a closer lens at looking at. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Kiki, you've done such a wonderful job of balancing those two, of balancing the culinary side and the advocacy, and explaining why we need to do both. It feels like a lot of these, I feel like we're kind of touching on quick conversation, like very quickly on very, very big conversations, but it also seems like the more we have, more often we either, we even just bring up these points, the more it helps people understand. What would you like people to know about what you're doing? What would you like the media or just individuals to hear about what it is you're doing right now as a chef?
Just trying to survive. That's it. Just trying to put my world back together, since it was completely destroyed over the past year and a half. And we are not out of the woods yet. We are, we've just opened up. New York is not back to normal. It sort of looks like on the outside it's back to normal, but it is not back to normal. And we are trying our best to get back to there. But really, I mean, that's sort of the pervasive thought every day. It's just, get through the day. You're still surviving.
It's really hard. It's I haven't felt like this since we were in our first few months of opening. It is a reset. It's a restart. It's extraordinarily difficult. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of challenges. We have a lot of debt, and most of our guests are great, but there's some people that I'm just like, how do you not get what we just went through? And we're still going through it. I think we get sort of it's a curse to make service magical and to make it look effortless, because they forget that our menu is smaller. No duh. Like, we don't have the people. We can't get a lot of ingredients sometimes. We are just starting, and we're trying to rebuild our lives and keep people employed. Like, stop expecting everything to be normal, because it is not normal, and it's not going to be normal for a long time. And we don't have amnesia about what we just went through. And we forget that, like, things changed every few weeks, and we're still kind of in that trajectory, and they're going to change maybe a little bit less often, but we're still evolving, and we're still prepared. And I'm guarded. I'm still bracing for the next shoe to drop. And I don't think that feeling is going to go away, because I think the next shoe is going to drop at some point. We have PTSD. Let's just be real clear about it. We're humans, and we're trying our best.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are out of time. This was a fantastic presentation. I'm going to ask our audience to stay tuned, as our presenters will come back with their top takeaway in one sentence after I give you some instructions for the closing reception. In our sessions, you can see Peter Hoffman for the Meet the Author conversation, or you can go to networking for a one-on-one chat, 4-minute video chat. And today's topic is one big idea for selling more sustainable dishes to consumers. We also have our Innovation Hub, where our sponsors are doing culinary demos, insightful presentations, and plant-forward innovation inspiration. Enjoy our closing networking reception, and don't forget to complete our summit evaluation, which is in the summit chat. And now I'm going to call on each of our presenters for their one sentence top takeaway from this session. And Kiki, I'm going to hand it over to you.
My one sentence takeaway, I would say that when we talk about plant-based, we're really talking about sustainability. And I think that in this conversation, it's become very clear that sustainability in the food and restaurant industry is more than just what's on your plate, right? It's a lot more about how we restaurants, about how our consumers dine with us, right? And what their perception is of the food, what the real cost of food is, what our so really, again, food touching kind of every aspect of life.
Okay, Chidi?
Stole my sustainability word, but I think that is the theme. You know, sustainability means being able to support lives that put food on our table, and for our food to be able to sustain a healthy life. It's a circular relationship. And I think it's important for people to educate themselves on what's best for their body and what's best for their planet and how the ecosystem actually works.
Okay, Amanda?
I've been doing these panels for a long time about vegetarian food and vegetables, and it's really fascinating to me to see how far we've come from where I started on these panels. And I don't know, it's pretty amazing to see something that sort of always existed, vegetables, become the real topic of conversation. And it is so exciting and fascinating, and I can't wait to see more of it.
Great. And Chandra?
I mean, my takeaway is just that, hey, this is all of us who are fortunate enough to be diners at restaurants like the ones we've been talking about need to be prepared to happily spend more money. So I will write faster so that I can make more money and do that. But this has just been so important. And, you know, this is obviously just, we touched on a lot of topics quickly, but let's keep this conversation going for sure, please.
Great. And thank you again to Plate Magazine for sponsoring this session and all of our presenters in this breakout and throughout the summit. We hope you've enjoyed the many insights, practical strategies, and inspiration and networking with our colleagues over the past 3 days. And we sincerely hope to see you all in person next June at our Hyde Park campus for our 10th annual Menus of Change conference. And thank you all again so much.